This week on The Startup Life.
There are certainly going to be some machines that can do that, but the creativity that we bring versus just working with our hands is going to be huge.
All right, Startup Nation, so let's take flight with Todd Palmer, founder of Extraordinary Advisors. The Startup Life begins now.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
Hey, Startup Nation. Do you enjoy The Startup Life? Now you can let the world know with gear from the show. Choose from the Label Yourself, Make Your Own Look, and Making Money t-shirts to tell your story of your path of entrepreneurship. Click the link in the show notes to purchase. All right, Startup Nation. So I hope you're ready to receive some value today. We got a big time guest in the building today, Startup Nation. We have Todd Palmer. What's going on, Todd?
Hey, Dominic, how are you, man?
I cannot complain, brother. I cannot complain. Are you ready to pour some knowledge in the Startup Nation today?
Absolutely. Let's put some fuel on that fire.
Let's do it. Let's do it. All right, Startup Nation. This is Dominic Lawson. This is the Startup Life Podcast, and it is powered by the Binge Podcast Network. So, Todd, first things first, man. Tell us about your path of entrepreneurship up until this point.
Well, it's crazy. So my path of entrepreneurship started when I was in about 6th grade. So I grew up in a really small town in mid-Michigan. I had 42 kids in my graduating class from high school. Wow. And my first entrepreneurial venture was actually selling candy that I bought at the store on the way into school to the kids in class. So I'd buy it for a nickel, sell it for a quarter. Great margins. Slowly progressed, and over the course of time, I started my first quote-unquote real business. 1997 when I started for $15,000. Started a staffing business, diversified industrial staffing, and I gave myself 90 days to make it work. World's worst business plan. And by a hook or crook, by day 72, we actually turned a profit. Okay. And then we've had some highs, we've had some lows, but it's certainly been an interesting ride. And I think I knew then, and as I know now, I don't think I'd be a really good employee. So being part of a startup when I was younger and being part of a startup now as I'm a little bit older have really fit well with my personality. Got you.
Definitely understand that after a while you become kind of unemployable, if you will. So, definitely appreciate you sharing that for sure. So, Todd, before we dive into you and everything, we're going to talk about your book a little bit and stuff like that. Tell me a little bit about, because you're there in the Detroit area, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the entrepreneurial climate and business culture there in Detroit.
I'm really glad you asked, because it's something I'm super proud of. The entrepreneurial culture here in Detroit has turned around significantly in the last 10 years. For so many years, we were very, automotive manufacturing dependent. And within the last 10 years, we've got an entrepreneur who's been just a huge influence on our community by the name of Dan Gilbert, founder of Quicken Loans, owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers.
For sure.
And he's brought over nearly 20,000 white-collar jobs in less than 7 years to downtown Detroit. He owns over 120 buildings down there now that he bought out of bankruptcy. And he's really turned around the culture down there. He's turned around the community. 10 years ago, we didn't even have a major grocery chain in downtown Detroit. Now,
really?
It was just really a ghost town. And it was tough as I would travel around the country as an entrepreneur doing different things. And people would say, oh, wow, you're from Detroit. We're so sorry. Now, when I tell people I'm from Detroit, like, oh my goodness, you're part of the big, Midwestern rebirth. And the credit's got to go to Dan Gilbert, who's brought in the Quicken folks. He's brought in incubators to fuel that entrepreneurial fire.
Got you. Thank you for sharing that. And the reason I wanted to ask is because you're exactly right. The story of Detroit in the business culture is a fascinating one. You go back to the big automotive booms in the 50s and the 60s and stuff like that. And then, like you said earlier, around the economic collapse of our economy around that 2007, 2008 period kind of really hit a downturn. But we've been hearing about the resurgence of Detroit. And I kind of want to get somebody's take on it from the ground floor.
Well, it's really exciting because they're creating an atmosphere for younger people and younger entrepreneurs who want to have that big city feel.
Right.
10, 15 years ago, nobody lived in the city of Detroit. You know, a lot of my friends, their significant others, their wives, their spouses didn't want to go to anything in Detroit because they didn't feel safe. Now we've got major sports downtown. All the major sports are there. We've got theater district. We've got a lot of restaurants and a lot of entrepreneurial ventures down there. And when friends come in from out of town, that's the place I take them to downtown Detroit because I'm super proud of it, the way it's come back, as well as it being a very safe and inviting area for everybody.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I want to dive into your book. In Startup Nation, Todd wrote a book, The Job Search Process, and you can buy that on Amazon. We actually have a link in the show notes for easy access to purchase that book. So before we get into the book itself, tell me about the process of writing the book, because we have many people who want to write books, but they're not really sure how to get started, what that process looks like. Kind of share that with us a little bit.
Well, I appreciate you asking. My book came out of a real passion I have for helping people get employment. Well, it may not have necessarily appealed to the folks who are listening to the Startup Nation program. I'm sure they have friends and family who are getting out of high school and college who are looking for their first job. And that's who the book is designed for. A buddy of mine, I kept saying there's a problem with hiring. There's a problem with kids coming out of school not having the information and the education. And he kept challenging me, hey, you got to write your book. You got to write your book. And so one night over a couple of pops, so to speak, he really put his money on the line, saying, listen, I think we should put a little skin in the game. You should have this book done within the next 6 months. Well, I wrote the book in less than 90 days. Wow. I devoted 100% of my time as the CEO of my company. I took a leave of absence, and I really cranked through that book because I found that the kids coming out of high school and college didn't know how to do a job search. And they didn't know how to find that job. And they didn't know that 80% of jobs are never listed anywhere. They didn't know how to market themselves to get a good opportunity. And nowadays, in the economy of full employment, there are plenty of opportunities and there's not enough people. So really, it's gone from employers being in charge of the hiring process and being able to select from several candidates, where now our employees and job seekers have several opportunities and they're able to be in the driver's seat during today's economy. So I think the book is even more applicable today than when I published it in 2015.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. And believe it or not, Ty, a lot of people in Startup Nation are not solely entrepreneurs. There are many of them who are actually working professionals in that traditional 9-to-5, or they're kind of that hybrid between the two. So no, it's very applicable. I assure you, for sure.
Well, especially for those people who are looking to transition out of maybe full-time employment into part-time employment with Gig Nation, with Freelancer Nation, with solopreneurs out there who might need that secondary income. There are a lot of companies, believe it or not, nowadays that will work around an alternative schedule. They will be more focused on the work product you create versus the hours you put in. So I think it's now an ideal time for someone who wants to take that entrepreneurial leap while still maintaining a sense of employment while they get their business started. It's a great time for everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, for sure. Now, there's a section in the book, the dump your egg section, right? And you tell the story about the guy, I think he was a friend of yours. He went back to college to get out of retail. Can you share that story with Startup Nation a little bit?
Can you refresh my memory a little bit on this one? I'm drawing a blank here.
Sure, no worries. I think it was a situation where you had a friend. He was in retail. He felt stuck, and he wanted to get out of retail. So he decided to go back to college, get a degree. Got the degree, was still stuck in retail, and he ended up blaming the college and not himself. Like, I think he was really speaking to like accountability of himself as opposed to pointing fingers outward, I think.
Well, and that happens quite a bit is the people go back to school and the difference, there's a real division. I used to be on a board of the school I graduated from here in Michigan. And I used to have the debate with the dean a lot. I said, well, are we in the education business? Or are we in the job readiness business? Because at the time my son was in school, I was like, I'm paying for him to get an education, so he will be best positioned to be able to take care of himself and his future family through the education he's acquired here at the university. And the university's position was very different. They were in the education business, not the job readiness business. So going back to the story you're alluding to, people really think that by going and getting a university degree, that's positioning themselves and that the university is going to help them. And that isn't always the case, especially nowadays with freelancer nation being so prevalent and with the skilled trade shortage, you can go out and make a six-figure income without a college degree if you learn a trade, if you learn to become a welder, you learn to become a machinist. Truck drivers are in high demand. There's just a lot of opportunities out there. And I think you're going to see a switch over the next 15 to 20 years where university degrees are going to be less important. People are going to be asking less in interviews what your degree is as compared to what can you, Mr. or Miss Employee or prospective job seeker, what can you do for us? What problems can you solve? You're even seeing with places like Google where the degrees are less important and the problem solving skills trump that education.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that. That actually segues into the very next questions I was going to ask, because Todd, I see every other day there's an article or a podcast or something out there that kind of talks about how the college degree is not necessarily, it's not important, but it's not weighted as much as it has, like back in maybe the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s and stuff like that. But also those articles and podcasts also talk about automation and tech and AI kind of like, being really infused into the marketplace as well. So I guess I wanted to just talk to you a little bit more about like if you have a crystal ball in front of you right now, what does the job market in your eyes look like 10, 15 years from now when you think about that college degree not being weighted as much and automation really making a surge into the job market?
Well, I think for anybody who's listening today, I think a real good person for them to research is a futurist. His name is Peter Diamandis.
Okay.
And Peter talks about, and he actually shows video proof of what some of these manufacturing environments are going to look like specifically. There are currently robots in some of these facilities that can do literally a backflip. They're so incredibly technologically advanced. So the work that people did 15, 20 years ago, even currently, is going to be gone. That's the reality. Mm-hmm. Some of this work is going to need to be, is going to be replaced by machines, replaced by AI. And if machine learning is as advanced as it appears to be, it's going to really take care of those mundane tasks that people do. I don't think the machines are going to be able to replace is that ability that people have to innovate.
Absolutely.
Going back to the entrepreneurial thought process, going back to the problem-solving thought process. There are certainly going to be some machines that can do that, but the creativity that we bring versus just working with our hands is going to be huge. I think that's where the real opportunity for people is going to be. There's certainly going to be the need for people to do other tasks such as, restaurant retail is going to be still needed. Some manufacturing is still going to be needed. Some driving is still going to be needed. Right. But the jobs our grandchildren are going to have are look really different. I always tell people who want to go into manufacturing, really take a look seriously at any type of repair type of training you can get, whether it's hydraulic, pneumatic, electrical. If you can repair the machines, that's going to give you a huge opportunity, because those machines eventually will wear out and break down. And while I can't promise you they're going to be able to repair themselves, right now we need people who can repair those. So that's going to be a key area, as well as anything else that people can do to solve problems in a creative mindset versus just putting their shoes on, going to work and using their hands. That's going to be key as well.
For sure. Really quick follow-up, if I would, because when you talk about, AI and tech kind of into the marketplace, that brings up the notion of a UBI, or a universal basic income. Where do you stand on that? Do you think that's a real thing, or what's your take on that?
Well, I think you're seeing that in other countries already. I think it's going to come to the United States. I think I just saw something recently where Target, the retailer, has indicated they're going to create a universal wage across the country within 2 years of $15 an hour.
Oh, wow.
And so that's going to contribute to it. You've got San Francisco, which has the highest minimum wage per hour. I think it's $15 or $16 out there. So that's going to change. What we're seeing is there's that generational push and pull between that older generation that had to work its way up, and then you have that younger generation who's going to work differently, and the value of their work is going to be measured differently. So as those things shift and change, I think something like a UBI is going to be coming into play as generationally we change. I mean, if you think about it over the last 100 to 110 years, the way we work in the United States has changed significantly. 100 to 110 years ago, 98% of us were farmers. Right. 50 years ago, 95% of us were in manufacturing. So as we cycle through these different iterations of what work looks like, there's going to have to be that social catch-all like a UBI is going to provide us. People have to get retrained. People have to learn new skill sets, and inventors, entrepreneurs are going to have to come up with new work for people to do.
For sure. For sure. Thank you for sharing that. And when you talk about that push-pull between generations, it reminds me, Startup Nation, of a previous guest, Lee Caraher, that we had on the Startup Life, where she talked about this is the first time in job market history where we have 5 generations in the marketplace. And so that's why you made me think about when you said that.
Yeah, I think your previous guest makes a really great point, and you can even take even a step further. We are at the lowest labor participation rate in 50 years. Wow. That means if there's 100 people in a room, 60 of them were working last 49 years ago that aren't working now. Those numbers are shifting and changing. Everybody watches the unemployment number. The real number to watch is a labor participation number. Then you take that labor participation number, the lowest in 50 years, and take a look at the unemployment category for millennials, and it's at 13%. The country's at 4%. The millennials at 13%. So you've got the baby boomers leaving the market. You have the lowest labor participation rate in 50 years, and then you have millennials who are not coming into the workforce to be measured. Now, again, they could be Uber drivers. They could be doing some different ways to make income, but they're not part of the fully employed. So those numbers really shift and change, and it puts some of these challenges. We talked about the UBI, but you also have to take a look at, what are we doing with visas? What are we doing with immigrants? What are we doing to fill these jobs we currently have with people who want to do the work, but yet they're not able to come into the United States and do them? So it gets very politically very complicated.
For sure. Thank you so much. And Startup Nation, when you hear Todd talk about these things like, the UBI or the labor participation number, it's very important as the entrepreneur that hires employees to be mindful of these things, because the marketplace, the job market really is changing before our eyes. And it's something that you should definitely be aware of. So Todd, I really appreciate all the value you just gave us.
Well, people are the differentiator for any business.
For sure.
And so, yeah, anybody listening, any entrepreneur who thinks they're going to be able to do it alone, go it alone, be that rugged individualist, you're going to be able to build yourself a job, which is fine. You can be a solopreneur. But if you really want to grow and scale a company, you're going to need those people. You're going to need that help. You've got to come up with ways to be that employer of choice. People have options and choices. What's going to make you the cool, unique place to want to work at versus your competitor?
For sure. For sure. Thank you for sharing that. I want to shift gears just a little bit here. Todd, you're a keynote speaker and you speak all over the country to HR professionals, entrepreneurs, and everything in between. Now, there are many entrepreneurs in Startup Nation who want to be influencers. So they get asked, to do speaking engagements, things, that, and the other. But a lot of people, as you know, fear public speaking. What advice would you give them as a veteran public speaker yourself?
Well, I can certainly appreciate where they're coming from. I think anytime I go on stage or anytime I'm going to do an appearance, you always get the butterflies. I've got some friends who are professional athletes, and they talk about playing in big games and doing different things. And they're more concerned if they don't have the butterflies, then they're not fully invested, because our bodies react when we really care about something we're going to do or a performance we're going to give. So anybody who gets the butterflies in the belly, that's very normal. I think what the best piece of speaking advice I've always gotten is to speak about something you're passionate about. Speak about something you care about. That's why I talk about jobs. That's why I talk about entrepreneurship. I'm not going to go in and talk necessarily about something that I don't have a visceral connection with. And really, if I had just told this to a speaker a couple of weeks ago, the biggest thing is if you can speak with authenticity, transparency, and you can show vulnerability from stage, that's what people are going to remember. They're not going to always remember the big words you used or the data points you threw out or your slides. They're going to remember how you made them feel. And if your audience in a 60-minute keynote can walk out with 2 to 5 actionable items or 2 to 5 takeaways, that's a big investment of their time versus you worrying about, was I perfect? Did I say everything identically great? And I had that flub. I had that mistake. That's the humanness. It's like going to see a band. I'd rather see a band that plays their music live than a band that plays to a backtrack and it sounds just like the audio.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And I hope you got that Startup Nation. That vulnerability piece, I think for me, really stands out for sure. Thank you for sharing that. So now, want to go back a little bit. Now, you talked about Diversified Industrial Staffing, the company you started a while back. And it's been recognized, as, Inc. Magazine 5,000 company 6 times, which is quite the accomplishment. However, before that happened, I know there were some radical changes that you had to make that predate that success. So Todd, if you would, take me back to 2006. What was going on with the company at that time?
Well, so now we're going to get into the vulnerable stuff of everything. I appreciate the question. And this is really the truth of it all. People would invite me to, after we made the list a few times, hey, will you come and talk to us about being successful? And which I'm always happy to do. But the reality is success is a learned behavior. Success is a learned process. And the only way we were able to learn to be successful as a company was by nearly going out of business. In 2006, it was just the beginning of the recession. Not everybody knew it, but hiring was starting to slow down. People were losing their jobs. Automotive here in Detroit was shifting and changing. And, as the leader of my company, I wasn't watching the proper navigational tools from the financial instruments of the business. Combined with, we had a couple of clients that actually basically stuck us with their debt, went out of business to the tune of almost $300,000, combined with the other debt we had. So by September of 2006, we were $600,000 in debt.
Wow.
I was 60 days away from running out of money. And I had a toxic and dysfunctional culture that was not producing any real measurable results. And I was suffering from a thing called imposter syndrome because I didn't want to deal with it. Gotcha. I was feeling very down. I was feeling depressed, and I just didn't want to deal with anything. So in 2006, I took a look at all the numbers, realized that I was in pretty bad shape, and I swallowed my pride and I reached out for help, and I actually hired a coach, and I paid him on a credit card because I didn't have any money. And with his guidance and suggestions, we started putting some plans in place. And the first part of that plan is I needed to make a change to my staff. So September 9th, 2006, I walked in and fired my entire company, and I started over.
Wow.
From that point, we put in a strategy, we put in some execution measurables, and then boom, the next year we made the Inc. 5000 for the first of 6 times as one of America's fastest growing company. But and that's a great part of the story, and I'm very proud of that. But the thing I'm even more proud of is that $600,000 in debt that our banks had given us the money for, our vendors had fronted that money to us. We paid all that back in full. And that's really, I think, the measure of the integrity we wanted to bring to that problem.
Hey, Startup Nation, I want to chime in with a reflection point really quickly because Todd just said something very interesting about how he got to being honored as a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner. Look, on your path to entrepreneurship, on your path to building your business, sometimes it's okay to take a step back. I know we have the pressure of trying to turn a profit as fast as we can. We have the pressure of trying to make the business work because we want to not have our friends and family say, oh, you should go back to work and things of that nature. I get all of those pressures, even the pressure that you put on yourself. However, Startup Nation, taking a step back sometimes allows you the ability to step forward. Look, if Todd didn't start over and fire everybody, it's pretty safe to say that he wouldn't be in business today, let alone being honored as such by Inc. Magazine. The point I'm trying to make is this, Startup Nation. On your path to entrepreneurship, just know that it's okay to start over because hitting that reset button allows you to see things differently. Remember when you was in year 2 or year 3 and you was like, man, if I could do it all over again, I would have done this differently. Well, look, this allows you to do things differently. And so on your path, and maybe you don't have, mounds of debt like Todd had, and that's fine. But when you hit that reset button, you wipe the slate clean and you're probably able to move further than the point than where you decided to start over. Let's get back to Todd.
Got you. Thank you for sharing that. I love when you say that success is a learned thing. I really appreciate that because a lot of times, a lot of people who really are new into the entrepreneurial lifestyle and things that and the other, they really get into this notion of you have the idea of video montage success. And you really point out in that story that that's not really how this works. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, well, and I think especially today nowadays with the Facebook world we live in and the social media world where everybody's posting their highlights, there's nothing wrong with sharing the good things in your life. And you're not always going to want to put out there on, I'm not going to put on Facebook, I'm $600,000 in debt.
Right.
That's an alternate reality as well. So I think the value of programs like yours is it creates an opportunity for the platform for the conversation, so that people do realize that there really is no overnight success. You got to grind through it. And one of the speeches I give, one of my favorite slides it's a quote from a doctor named Dr. Daniel Friedland. And he talks about failure. And he says, if I've learned something and I've grown through that process, and I've never really failed, because every one of those quote unquote failures is nothing more than a step along my pathway to being successful. And I think that shift in mindset, that every little one of these setbacks is temporary. Oh, by the way, every one of these successes can also be temporary if not managed appropriately.
That's an excellent point.
So I think it's important for people who are listening to the program today to recognize that, when we're in the entrepreneurial mindset, we can get very isolated. We can think that, well, everybody else in the world is doing great and I'm not doing well. But the reality is most entrepreneurs struggle significantly. I mean, 9 out of 10 businesses fail within the first 5 years. It's not an easy life to go. But if you're able to get through that period, if you're able to create opportunities for your customers, create opportunities for your employees, and create opportunities for your family, it can be an incredibly rewarding business, but it definitely can have its challenges.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Todd, I believe entrepreneurs consider themselves lifelong learners, always engaged in constant professional development. So when you hear that phrase, professional development, what does that mean to you? And what are you learning now? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you reading a certain book? Share that with us.
Well, I do believe you're absolutely correct that to be a successful entrepreneur, you do have to be a lifelong learner. From my perspective, I go to a program every year at MIT on entrepreneurship. I'm part of EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization. It's a group of peer-to-peer learning from other entrepreneurs, other people who are in different spaces or different businesses than I'm in. We get together on a monthly basis. So I learn from other people. I read books constantly regarding, not only just the practical applications of business in regards to people, cash, strategy, and execution, but I'm also reading books from neuroscientists who talk about how the brain works, how we make the decisions we make, why we do some of the things we do, and how we can change our brain to make different decisions. Because I find that the work I do with my current business, Extraordinary Advisors, is I'm spending a lot of time with my clients, getting them to align their business vision, their mission statement for the company, with their personal core values, because oftentimes those things are out of alignment. So we spend a lot of time getting people going in that direction. So there's a lot of different ways that we can learn from podcasts, from books, from peers, from articles, and from experience.
And we're actually going to dive right into Extraordinary Advisors when we get back from break. But we're going to do that right now. How do you like being on the Startup Life so far?
You are an excellent questioner, and I appreciate the depths and the levels that we're going to today. This is exciting.
No worries. Thank you so much.
So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. I hope you're getting great value from Todd's content, but we got to pay a few bills. Once again, my name is Dominic Lawson. This is the Startup Life Podcast, and it is powered by the Binge Podcast Network. Hey business owner, the Startup Life reach is growing. Wouldn't you like your business to grow with it? Reach out to us to advertise on the Startup Life. You can reach us at 901-857-4818, or you can email me at dominic@askalsolutions.com. I mean, don't get me wrong, like this is a great music to have break on, but wouldn't this break sound a lot better with the same music but your business being advertised on it? Need more content from the Startup Life, you say? You can now sign up for the Startup Life All Access Pass on the Binge Podcast Network's Patreon page. There is exclusive content written by yours truly, video content where I share even more of my business philosophies, and whatever crazy content I can think of out of that crazy head of mine. And at only $5 a month, yeah, $5 a month, this is more content for you, Startup Nation, to really get ahead of your competition. So instead of upsizing that meal at your favorite fast food joint, you can now invest in yourself on your path to entrepreneurship. Click the link in the show notes to sign up.
All right, Startup Nation, so let's continue. So Todd, if you will, sir, tell us a little bit more about Extraordinary Advisors that you mentioned before the break.
Sure. Extraordinary Advisors is my coaching and speaking business. And what I really find is the most rewarding part of that business is the way I'm able to help entrepreneurs get out of their own way. And I often will speak to them from the experiences that I had back in 06 and 07 when I was in my own way. So I'll speak from what I call Gestalt protocol. Here's been my experience. These are the challenges I've faced, because it's very difficult sometimes for people to take advice unless you've really walked the path. Right. And I found that when I was researching to find a coach, when I was looking for somebody back in 06, 07, I talked to 50 different people, and most of them had never had their own business. They were just, I read in a book, or I took a training, or I worked for McKinsey or a KPMG or someone large like that, but I've never actually had my skin in the game. So when I work with my clients, I'll often talk to them about the decisions I had to make, the challenges that I had to face, also talk about other clients that I've worked with, because I found that in order to build the business as the coach, I have to build up the entrepreneur. I have to see potential within them. And I was explaining to one client one day, he's like, how do you see that stuff? I said, well, and he's a football fan. I said, you're a football guy. I said, I'm up in the booth and I'm watching you as the quarterback trying to execute these plays. Well, he had a weak player on his team. I said, keep throwing the ball to that guy who keeps dropping the ball. So I'm going to be in your ear saying, well, why do you keep throwing the ball to this guy? Either assign him a different position on the team, or you might have to free him up and let him go to go play for a different team because he's not executing for your team. All those different things of the guilt he was feeling of potentially having to let an employee go, the challenge he was having that he felt the employee was not coachable, the stress he had that the business wasn't growing the way he wanted to do. Once we got him to anchor his decisions in his core values and anchor his belief system in his mission statement, then he decided to let that employee go, and then his business took off like a hot fire. He increased his margins by almost fourfold, and he's making more money than he's ever made before, and it couldn't do that until he got out of his own way.
Right, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that's one of those things where I imagine as an entrepreneur and you have employees, like letting someone go has to be tough. Like that cannot be an easy thing, but sometimes it's the necessary thing to do in order to, like you said, to really move forward and scale the business. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, and I share this with all my clients because when I go to work with a CEO or an entrepreneur, I'm typically also working with their leadership team. And every single time that I start working with a group, I always tell the leader, you have to be okay that up to half of your team could turn over within the first 12 months. Because as you change as a leader and as you change the direction of the company, or as you start holding others accountable, or you start really putting out there what's important to you, that's going to rub people the wrong way. They may self-select off the team. You may identify a teammate who you have who's just an underperformer, or they're in the wrong seat, and we have to make some difficult choices. And what I really teach them to do is I teach them how to let people go when they do have to terminate someone with an amazing level of kindness and compassion, because it is a difficult choice. But the reality is, not every job is for every person. So if someone's on your team and they're in the wrong spot, let's craft an opportunity where they can have a soft landing, where they can get freed up to go do what they should be doing, and even if it's doing it for somebody else. And so we'll go through the language tracks, we'll put together a plan, and then we'll coach them through how to terminate with kindness. Because at the end of the day, it's important for me as the coach to make sure I'm taking care of the best interest of the entire entity, not just a few players on the team or just even the entrepreneur, the CEO. We have to think about what the best interest of the organism is. If this business needs the 5 leaders of the team to be going in one direction, you've got one person going in the different direction, they may not be a good fit for this team long term.
Got you. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that for sure. So I know at Extraordinary Advisors that you have workshops and other services that you provide, coaching and things of that nature. What kind of value could your clients expect when they get coaching from Todd? And once again, Startup Nation, if you want coaching from Todd, go to extraordinaryadvisors.com. There is actually a link in the show notes for easy access. But what kind of value do they get from you, Todd, when they get some of your coaching?
Typically, what I tell people is you can expect to get about a 4 times return on your investment.
Wow.
So it depends on what they want. And you know, the other thing of it is too, is I do a pretty thorough diagnostic when someone's interested in engaging me. And I'd say I probably turn down 50 to 75% of the people who want to work with me because it's just not going to be a good long-term fit. So for me, I need someone, like you said, who's a lifelong learner. I need someone who's coachable. I need someone who can bring a certain level of self-awareness and authenticity to that relationship. Because what I do in my coaching practice is I do twice a month phone calls. I do quarterly sessions with the leadership team, but I'm also available to my clients 24/7, 365. So if they've got a crisis, they've got an issue, they simply send me a text or give me a phone call. And I promise to get back to them within 6 to 12 hours to address those issues. Now, I know a lot of coaches who are part of different programs will do just the quarterly meetings and maybe they do a couple other programs. I actually enjoy walking the path of my clients. I enjoy being in the weeds with them. I enjoy fighting the battles with them because if I can help them see a different opportunity in the moment and they can make a different pivot in that time frame, then they're able to have success and they're able to take care of the things that are important to them right now. I'm not going to make somebody wait until our next quarterly meeting in 60 days. Let's do it now. Let's get it taken care of now. And what I find is the accelerated growth these companies have, so far, everybody I've worked with has exceeded that 4X multiplier. So it's worked well, but again, it's not a process and I'm not a coach that's going to fit everybody, but for the ones I've worked with and the ones who've trusted me with their businesses and their personal fears and their self-doubts, we've been able to conquer those in such a way where they've reached, levels of financial success as well as freedom of time success they never even thought was possible.
Gotcha. I hear that. Now, Todd, I want to go back to something you said earlier before the break, and you talked about the imposter syndrome, right? And that's something that it appears that you work with your clients in your workshops and coaching and seminars and things of that nature. The reason I bring that up is because, honestly, you don't hear a lot of men saying that that's an issue for them, the imposter syndrome, right? And so I really think that, you speaking about that vulnerability, it makes me think about Brene Brown and how vulnerability is power. It really reminds me of how being vulnerable can be a big asset. Do you agree with that?
I really do. In fact, the vulnerability, transparency, and authenticity are what inspire people. Mm-hmm. I think Brene Brown is a cutting edge leader in that space. I've watched her podcast or her TED Talks several times, and I always find new information. When it comes to being specifically a man in the business place, you've got to bring your true self in there because people can feel the difference. They can feel it on a cellular level that you're posturing or that you're BSing them. And I did that. And when I was in bad space, 06, I didn't tell anybody how bad things were. I just walked around walking, like the emperor had no clothes. I thought I had it all figured out. I was very self-reliant. A lot of entrepreneurs become that way. A lot of it comes from our childhood of our self-reliance. But as soon as we can reach out and we can ask for that kind of help and we can find that trusted advisor who's going to give us that guidance, who's going to hear our fears. And there's so much power in saying, I'm simply afraid. I'm afraid I'm going to let my family down. I'm afraid I'm going to let my employees down. I'm afraid because I don't know the right answer, but I know the answer's out there, versus thinking you've got to take all that burden, all that responsibility. It can be crushing. It can be debilitating.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so with my clients, I find, I had one client who just burst into tears because he says to me, I just don't know what to do anymore. And I've tried everything I can possibly do. And he was basically in the brain space of fight or flight. Right. And he shared that with me. We were able to free up that energy, free up that mindset. And then we just brainstormed out for like an hour and a half, all the creative solutions he could possibly think of. Boom, he was on his way. But until it's almost like people who have, challenges with substance or with alcohol or with other things. until they were able to really recognize that they are sometimes powerless to things that are going on around them, that's when they take the power back. That's when they get creative. That's when they get into a higher state of conscious so that they're able to be creative. Because when an entrepreneur is worried about cash, when they're worried about different things, they can't be their best creative self. And it's that creative self that creates those opportunities for the marketplace for them to create a unique offering, a unique service, a unique product. So we've got to access that in order for them to be successful. And they can't be there if they're living in a space of fear and self-doubt.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. And that actually leads me to my next question, Todd, because on your website, you have testimonials, right? And so, you know, when you think about those testimonials and people saying like, Todd, man, thank you so much. I don't know where I would have gone if I didn't get it. I don't know where I would be today if I didn't contact you and got that coaching from you. How does that make you feel, man? Like when you hear those testimonials and you hear that sense of relief, like I really helped somebody today. What does that make you feel on the inside, Todd?
You know, it's incredibly humbling, Dominic. I was so fortunate about 12 years ago. I met a guy named Simon Sinek. He wrote a book that hadn't even come out yet.
Absolutely.
So I got a chance to work with him one-on-one. And in that work, we discovered for me what why is. And my why is improving lives. It's on the back of my business card. It's what I want to do. So when a client voluntarily shares that I was able to help them, or they send me a referral to a trusted friend or family member, I take that incredibly seriously because it's the work they've done. I've simply maybe created space for them to see those opportunities, or I've helped them, discard some of their stinking thinking to be able to free up that part. But they've actually done the work, and that they're so grateful and so appreciative. And when someone really does take the time to put something in writing, it's just incredibly humbling, because I'm just a regular person. I'm an entrepreneur who struggled as well. And so when I'm able to share that, and I'm able to maybe dull the edge of the pain for them, or remove some of the pain they've felt because we come up with a new strategy or a new concept, or get them to hire a new employee, or get them to get rid of a toxic employee, the reward is so incredibly rewarding. It's really hard to put into words.
Got you. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Todd, I know you live there in Michigan, in the Detroit area, like we said before. And so with that being said, in your state, it reminds me you have one of the best coaches of any sport of any level, and Tom Izzo in Michigan State, in my opinion, of course. And so, I always thought that, with Tom, he doesn't always have the best talent, but what you're going to get with him and his team is that they're going to play hard and they're going to focus on fundamentals. So when I think about that, and I think about your coaching business and your coaching style, if I were to ask one of your clients, like, what's Todd's coaching style, what would they tell me?
Well, it's so funny because I just had a client tell me this.
Okay.
Because I had someone reach out to me, I'd like to work with you, but can I get a referral? So I sent them a couple of people, and I didn't prep them. I said, just tell them whatever you want to tell them. And both of the referrers told this person the same thing, is that Todd cares tremendously about our success, and he is authentic. What you see is what you get. Mm-hmm. One of the best things they tell me is I make them feel incredibly uncomfortable because I ask them the difficult questions, and then I let them sit with them, and I don't rescue them.
I hear that.
As they sit with those uncomfortable questions and they sit with those difficult decisions, I'm there as a sounding board, but I let them talk it out. One of the things I think I bring to the table is my job is to listen, to absorb. My job is not listen to respond. And I take them and I move them from the thought process they have of they expect something to happen. They demand something to happen. I said, let's talk about having the intention behind that. What do you intend to have happen? And how do we get you there? And what they say is, Todd makes it incredibly uncomfortable. He gets us to think in a very unique way. And he always pulls us out of the fire before the end of our call or the end of our session. So then we've got actionable steps. But until they lean into that uncomfortableness, until they go through that piece of, going back to Tom Izzo, they got to run those ladders. They've got to do that running, and those muscles are going to hurt. But that's why his teams are better conditioned, because he's willing to put the kids in a spot where they are uncomfortable. So I'm a big baseball fan.
Gotcha.
And I got an opportunity to spend some time with Jim Leland when he was the manager of the Detroit Tigers. Right. And I thought I had the most brilliant question ever. I said, hey, I just have one question for you, Coach. How do you manage 25 egos of multimillionaires who probably make more money than you do yet you're the leader in the clubhouse. How do you deal with it? He goes, oh, it's really easy. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get like the holy grail of wisdom. He goes, here's what you do. You manage them all the same. You manage them 25 different ways. Shook my hand and walked away. I'm like, oh my gosh. But now that I'm coaching, it's very true. Every one of my coaching relationships is very unique. It's like having 25 kids. I care about them desperately. I want to see them be successful. I want them to have the version of success that they want, not the version of success that I think they should have. So by anchoring in what they want, creating a path for them to get there, creating those sometimes those uncomfortable moments where that learning really takes place. I think that if you talk to all of my clients, you'd see those pillars appear again and again.
Got you. Thank you for sharing that. And from afar, I'm very familiar with General Lee. He just seems like a straight shooter. So that story doesn't surprise me at all.
Oh, he is a real guy. There's just no fluff with Jim Leland.
For sure. And I was actually going to save this for later, but since we're already here, I was going to ask you here now. So like you said, you are a big baseball fan. I saw that you were at Comerica Park for opening day. So I want to ask you this, man. The greatest Detroit Tiger to ever put on a uniform is who?
Well, that's a pretty big question. So I've been really fortunate. I actually still play baseball. I still play competitively in Detroit. I'll go to Arizona and I'll play in Florida. I'll play in the tournaments. Okay. And I've had the real fortunate to go and participate in the Detroit Tigers fantasy camp.
Nice.
So I've actually got to meet a lot of these guys over the course of time. And it's interesting because now that I've actually spent time with them as men and as people, my opinion has actually changed. I would think most people would say that the greatest Detroit Tiger of my generation would have been like an Alan Trammell or Jack Morris, the Hall of Fame types, or the Kurt Gibson with the big home runs.
Right.
My favorite player growing up was Lance Parrish. I wore number 13. He wore number 13. And I've met Lance several times, and he's a complete class act. But for me, I think the greatest Detroit Tiger of all time is so generational. It's really hard to put a label on it. But I will say this. The best player, the best human being combination I've ever had an opportunity and very fortunate to interact with has been Alan Trammell. He's a true gentleman. He's nice to everybody, regardless of what your station in life is. He's giving of himself. He's an excellent teacher. He cares. He has pride in what he does. Versus a lot of athletes, and they'll tell you this when they're playing, it was pretty much all about them. It was a dog-eat-dog world. I love talking to the retired players. They just have a different appreciation for not only where they've had their successes, some of the struggles they've experienced, but also what can they give back, not only to the fans and people they meet, but also back to the game they love. It's so refreshing to spend time with someone like Alan Trammell.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Todd, clearly you must be a cool dad because your son Tyler invited you to come eat with him and his girlfriend for Cinco de Mayo. And so,
yes, he did.
Right. So you have to admit that's high praise, right? So and clearly, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say, clearly you guys have a great relationship. So I guess I wanted to ask you this. What has Tyler taught you about building relationships and running a company?
That's probably the best question I've ever been asked on a podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to ask that.
No worries.
So I was a single dad. I got custody of Tyler when he was 2 years old.
Okay.
And I started my company when he was about 7. So he saw the ups and the downs and the highs and the lows of business. And I think the biggest lesson I learned from Tyler was in regards to 2006. He and I had a conversation, and I told him about the bad state of the business. There were years we didn't have Christmas because of decisions that I had made. And we would talk about it, and I said to him, because he had a friend whose dad was a bankruptcy attorney. He goes, well, I was talking to Mr. So-and-so, and I told him about your situation. He said you could just file bankruptcy, and you could discharge that $600,000 in debt and start over. And I said to him, buddy, you're absolutely correct. I could totally do that. But since you've been just a little guy, I've always told you that we honor our words. We keep our commitments. We are men of pride. We are men of honesty. And I said, I have not done everything I can possibly do to pay off that debt. So until I do that, I can't, in good faith to the banks or to the vendors who fronted us that cash, not honor those commitments, or at least, nearly die trying. So it's so funny. He just graduated college a couple years ago, and for his graduation gift, we actually went hiking in the mountains of Peru to Machu Picchu.
Nice.
And he brought that conversation up out of nowhere. And he said, yeah, I was telling somebody in my business classes about that story. They were just blown away because the easy thing to do would have been to discharge that money. He goes,
Right.
you stood up and you kept your word, and, maybe we sacrificed, but, he was so respectful towards me, and he was he had an admiration for my decisions. And I think now, as he's entering the phase of his life where he's going to be starting a family someday soon, probably,
Right.
it's a great legacy as a parent to recognize and realize that sometimes things that we don't think our kids are paying attention to, they're actually paying attention to. Things
Absolutely.
that we think we're maybe, because again, we want to make our kids happy. I'm going to discharge the money. I'm not gonna pay it just so Tyler can have a better Christmas that year. No, the reality is we got into this problem. We're going to get out of this problem somehow. And, like Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great, we're going to deal with our brutal reality, our Stockdale paradox. We're going to have faith that we're going to somehow survive, but we're going to recognize how we got here. And for him as a, 20-something-year-old accountant to say that to me, that's a legacy that's going to pay dividends, hopefully for generations within our family.
I hear that. You're absolutely right. It's amazing what kids retain, right? And they just kind of pop it out of nowhere. So I appreciate you sharing that story for sure.
Well, I appreciate you asking.
No worries. No worries. So Todd, as you know, the Startup Life podcast is based here in Memphis, Tennessee. And I see that you were recently here. I see you had pictures at a Central Barbecue, at Redbirds Stadium, this, that, and the other. So let me ask you this, man. How was the barbecue?
Oh, the barbecue was outstanding.
Awesome.
We had such a good time. I was so blessed. Myself and my partner Jennifer, we were invited to come down and do a client session down in Memphis. And the client was so generous with his time, and he took us around the city, and we got to try a bunch of different things, and got to meet some really authentically, genuinely nice people, and we got to go to Graceland and just enjoy the entire community. And it was just, I'd never been to Memphis, and it reminded me so much of parts of Detroit. We've got the Motown Museum. You guys have Sun Records and Graceland, and the music and the people and the pride that people that I interacted with was just so refreshing. And the people were so, very thoughtful and very caring about their community. It really reminded me of being back home, which, I mean, when you travel, you want to see new things, but you always love that sense of being part of a community that cares about where they're from and what they want to represent to the world. And Memphis did an outstanding job when we were there.
For sure. Well, just know that you're always welcome back in the Bluff City for sure. I'm glad you had a good time. And
I hope to come back soon.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. So, Todd, I believe all entrepreneurs have a superpower. What's yours and why?
I think my superpower is that willingness to be in the uncomfortable moments, and that willingness to go up in front. I mean, I've sat in front of 600 people and told them the story of being $600K in debt, 60 days away from running out of money, firing my entire company, all the different challenges we went through, versus walking on stage and saying, you know what, I'm a super genius. We're on the Inc. 5000 6 times. Aren't I cool? Because that's just not true. The reality is in those tough moments. So, whether it's with my staff or whether it's with my family, I think the biggest thing for me that I think makes me uniquely who I am is my ability to be, I call it ATV, authentic, transparent, and vulnerable, and present with people. Because I think that giving someone the gift of being present for the conversation and sharing that moment with them, whether, again, it's one of my clients with Extraordinary Advisors, with our diversified industrial staffing employees, helping them find new jobs, with a client trying to solve an issue. People seem to genuinely appreciate that in today's world where maybe not as much of that was going on as it was 20 years ago.
Got you. Thank you for sharing that. And before I ask my last question, Todd, I just want to say once again, thank you so much for coming on the Startup Life podcast, powered by the Binge Podcast Network. You've gave amazing value, from talking about vulnerability to the imposter syndrome to even talking about how to come over those fears of public speaking. So I do appreciate all of that, good sir, for sure. So now I'm actually going to turn the microphone over to you, and I want you to talk to Startup Nation. Look, there's an entrepreneur out there. They're looking for a little motivation today. They feel stuck in their business. They don't know how to move forward, or they're afraid to get started. Todd, talk to Startup Nation and tell them why they should move forward today.
Well, the best thing I can tell anybody who's listening from Startup Nation today is this. There's a lot of hyperbole, and there's a lot of spin and a lot of polish around entrepreneurship nowadays. The reality is it's a hard job. you are building a job for yourself. You're building a career for yourself. And recognize that. Give yourself that caring and compassion to lean into those uncomfortable moments. If you don't know something, don't be stubborn like I was. Don't collapse in yourself and suffer from imposter syndrome like I did. Reach out for help. There's plenty of people. There's coaches like myself. There's people through EO. There's people through SCORE and other organizations. But an entrepreneur alone is an entrepreneur risk. Recognize that wherever you go, present your best self. Because you never know whether you're talking to somebody at the grocery store, or you're talking to somebody, at a restaurant. You never know who your next customer could be, or better yet, you never know who your next employee could be. So bring your best self wherever you go. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And if you think that you have a great idea or you have a great business thing that you want to go out there, I always tell people to take that leap of faith, believe in yourself, and know that there are people out in the world that want to see you succeed. And you can too potentially make the Inc. 5000 6 times like we did.
I hear that. Thank you so much. And that's going to wrap up this session of the Startup Life. Todd, thank you so much. Did you enjoy being on the show?
You know what, Dominic? I had a great time. And I appreciate so much your willingness to do such a great job researching. And so what I'd like to tell your audience today is anybody who enjoyed our conversation today, go to extraordinaryadvisors.com, hit me up on the contact page. I'm happy to give you 30 minutes of my time and we can talk about whatever you want, but please mention that you heard me on Dominic's show so I can get back to him and share with him what a great group of listeners he's got.
That is amazing. You hear it first, Startup Nation. We love freebie, Startup Nation. So Todd, thank you so much for that. And I really appreciate that. And we'll probably, and once again, we'll have Extraordinary Advisors, the link in the show notes for easy access. All right, Startup Nation.
So here's my final take. Todd gave us some great value, from talking about vulnerability to talking about hitting the reset button and everything in between. But one thing I want to really highlight, Startup Nation, is the public speaking piece that he talked about earlier. Look, on your path to entrepreneurship, some of you are going to want to be known as influencers and people of expertise, if you will, and you're going to have those public speaking events. When Todd talks about the important thing is making sure you leave somebody with some type of value or just a couple of talking points, that is so important. A lot of times, Startup Nation, we feel that we got to empty the cup or we got to get all the words out. And sometimes, Startup Nation, when public speaking, that's not necessarily something you necessarily have to do. As long as you make an impact, Startup Nation, whether it be a 30-minute speech or a 60-minute speech or a 5-minute speech, honestly, that's all that really matters. If you want to let us know what you think about the show, have an idea for a show topic, or like to advertise on our show, please send us a message on the Startup Life Podcast Facebook page. And while you are there, like and follow our page as well. It's a way for us to engage with you, Startup Nation, and really grow our community. The link is here in the show notes. Subscribe to the show, as it can now be heard on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or whatever your favorite platform to get your podcast on. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you find our content valuable, please give us a 5-star rating, as it will help us climb the charts and help more people find our show. Also, don't forget to sign up for the Startup Life All Access Pass to get exclusive content. This is exclusively on the Binge Podcast Network's Patreon page. And hey, if you have an idea, be about that life. The Startup Life. What up, Startup Nation? Are you here for that extra content? Alrighty, here you go.
The state of entrepreneurship in the United States in particular, and maybe even the world because of the internet, but let's take the United States specifically.
Sure.
There is this, and I think you used the word entrepreneur. It's absolutely, or a wantrepreneur. It's absolutely true. If you're going to start up a little Spotify store and try to resell raincoats, and you're putting an hour into it a day and you're calling that a business and you're an entrepreneur, that's dumb. That's not who you are. That's not what being an entrepreneur is. It's not even close. An entrepreneur is somebody that risks everything to get some return and works like they never can imagine having to work. If you're not doing that, there are no shortcuts. And I think that the problem has been that there are some, and they are very, very few. That's why they're called unicorns.
That, Startup Nation, is the no-nonsense straight shooter Jerry Brazy out of Portland, Oregon. So if you want to get that content as soon as it's uploaded, go ahead and subscribe on the Startup Life Podcast on any of your favorite major podcast platforms. So that way, when that content with Jerry is uploaded, it'll be right there waiting for you. But until then, Startup Nation, get out of here. You got a company to grow.